Okay, so this afternoon I am with John Stewart, CCS Adjunct Extraordinaire. Welcome, John.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming to the Teaching and Learning Center in the SEC.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So not only do you teach philosophy online, on ground, in the district, but you are a late night talk show host, is that correct?
Well, I'm in retirement now. It was a daily show, yeah.
Okay.
I always wanted to do philosophy, so I made the career move, yeah.
That's good. That's a good jump,
Yeah.
Entertainer to philosopher.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about some course design strategies that you've used to kind of re-engage students into your reading material, but also into your lecture content. And we're going to look at how you've done that. But I wanted you to introduce yourself and what do you teach? Where do you come from? Any background info on John?
Yeah, well, I've been teaching philosophy here as an adjunct for about 2.5 years, started in the fall of 2017. Before that, I was in the graduate program of philosophy at Gonzaga, so just here in town. So this is really happy to come here to the community colleges. In fact, it was always my goal to teach at the community college, not really at the university. I've always liked this environment. In fact, I started my own college career at a community college. I didn't finish the AA, but I think I did my first 1.5 years there before I jumped to the university. So always have loved this environment. Background, did a lot of music, played drums, percussion. In fact, I was a music major to begin with for a year before I realized I just wanted to be a rock and roll player. So played in a lot of bands, put some records out, like indie type stuff. That was a lot of fun. Moved here from Olympia, so I'm from the west side of the state.
Cool.
Yeah.
Die-hard Nirvana guy growing up, or what?
Well, I've got some stories about that, but one of my best friends knew those guys in high school, and they recorded a lot of their stuff in their garage down the street from where I lived.
Really?
But I was never really that into Nirvana, honestly, at the time. I was into Rush.
Perfect.
My favorite band, yeah.
Sorry about their drummer.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely.
All right, so Nirvana, Rush. Let's talk a little bit of course design.
Yeah.
Could you describe the course design strategy that you've created for your online philosophy courses?
Yeah. I started teaching my online classes in the fall of 2018. But before that, I had taught for a whole year on ground. I liked the way my on-ground class was going. It seemed to be working pretty well. So naturally, I think this is probably what many instructors do, I just wanted to see what I could do to kind of replicate that for the online experience. So basically my on-ground class is the model that I'm using. So I think we're mostly talking about discussion boards, is that?
Yeah. How are you, the focus of this module is to engage students in our online lectures. And so I knew working with you before, we had some conversations about how you have gotten students to watch more of your lectures and participate in your discussion board even more. So I thought maybe you could share that strategy.
Yeah, so again, going back to this model being the on-ground model, for that kind of class, of course, I'm going to have the students do an assigned reading before they come into class, either that night before or the morning of. That's where they're going to get the nuts and the bolts, the content of what we're going to be going over. And then, of course, on the on-ground class, that's when we have the discussion, but also that's where I help them to understand the text more accurately and go deeper into the text. And that's kind of what I'm doing with these posts. So the first post is the content post, it's the discovery post, it's the post where I give them a guided reading to kind of help mitigate some of the difficulties of philosophy, so they have a focus on what they need to be learning, a narrative that takes them through the reading. They get those nuts and those bolts, all that content. Now we're ready to have a discussion, and they're also ready to listen to my lecture. That's where the subsequent posts come in. There's at least 2 of them. One is devoted to the video media, where I give a lecture, or sometimes I use YouTube videos that work really well, like Crash Course. Sometimes I'll do that as well. And then one of the subsequent posts is devoted to dialogue with other students. So what I'm looking for is discovery with the initial post, but then revision, continued learning, reflection, critical reflection for the subsequent posts. So they need to show evidence that they've watched my video and show how their understanding is deepened or changed, and then do make any revisions to their initial post. And they can also get a lot of insight from the other students that have done good work. They learn from their fellow peers, which is kind of the way it really works, and don't want to discourage that. So they can correct or revise their initial post and the subsequent post by simply talking about what they learned from their students. So there's different ways that they can show that they've changed or that they've gone through a change in this process of learning.
I really like how that's how you're using your discussion boards. I mean,
Yeah.
that's almost better than an on-ground discussion.
Yeah.
On-ground's in-class discussions, you got an hour, 45 minutes, doesn't allow this time to let the information grow inside of someone. You know,
Yeah.
maybe some quick insights from conversations around the table, but you're having students discover, as you say, you know, come back, view another opinion or watch the lecture, which is another take on what they've read,
Yeah.
and then kind of let that matriculate into a response to a peer. And so I think it's a pretty interesting strategy that you've developed there. That's pretty cool, John. And I know when you first started doing this, we talked initially how as a side effect, you know, your lecture views were up quite a bit, the ones that were in Panopto. I think
Yeah.
I remember it being like 15% before of your students were watching the lectures, up to 85%. So that's a pretty cool side effect for this interesting approach to discussion boards.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned earlier, before we started recording, a piece in your syllabus that you use to introduce this concept to students. Do you mind reading that section out of your syllabus?
Yeah. There's more that I could read, but I think this will be sufficient for right now. So again, this is talking about the learning process. I mean, there is a learning process. It's not just a one-time stab at the material. It's multiple stabs at the material that really gets the student to, you know, learn, and they need to percolate this, or allow it to percolate into them. And so, and that's what happens over the course of the different posts. So to put this into focus, as you move from your initial post through to your subsequent posts, a key element that I want to see is continued growth and development. In order to best accomplish this task, the discussion boards are set up to foster a step-by-step process of learning. The first step in this process is the initial discovery phase, and this is mostly done with the initial post. The second step is continued learning, critical reflection, dialogue, and revision, making corrections. And this is done with the subsequent posts. So again, this is involving trying to engage the student in a full process of learning, not just this one-time event. Because I don't think people learn very well, especially something as complex as philosophy. You have to keep revisiting the material if you're going to really learn it.
Yeah, I like how you're framing that from the syllabus, and then you continue framing that within the assignment discussion, or the assignment prompts, the discussion prompts.
Yeah, and also I think it's important, I have to, of course, train the student to understand the way that the process works and how it's intended. And it's not until they fully understand it that I start to see real improvements in their work. And even I get a sense that they're really enjoying the class after they've learned how the process is supposed to work. And so for the first few weeks, it's fairly intensive grading on my part. It takes a lot of my time. I've kind of reserved the fact that I'm not going to have much of a life for those first 2 weeks, but that's okay. So in order to get them to learn what they need to know in terms of how it's supposed to operate, I give them a lot of feedback on pointers on what they can do to change things, on what's required, and I want them to show evidence that they've done the things that I've asked them to do, not only in terms of the reading, but also in terms of the discussion boards. The video media that they've actually watched it, and so on and so forth.
Cool. And once you've made this change to your design, what have you noticed about the quality of the students' responses?
It's gotten a lot better. They seem to be giving more substantive responses. Also because I require that they show evidence that they've done the reading and watched the video media. It's a lot more clear to me that they're actually doing those things, which also helps in the engagement process. It also helps to give them a more of a holistic sort of understanding, and you see that in the posts. So yeah, just overall better quality and more engagement.
Okay. Any advice if I wanted to take on this kind of strategy? What advice would you give me if I wanted to implement it into my own class?
Well, of course, this is for any teaching, but it's certainly important here. You want to be really clear in your syllabus and in any of the other instructional materials what the process looks like. I think they call this transparency, kind of why you're wanting them to do this, but also really kind of spelling it out for them. And then again, as I mentioned, you want to, especially for those first few weeks, you have to spend a lot of time kind of training them on how the class is supposed to work and what they're supposed to do in the posts and what you're expecting. But once you have that done, things get a lot smoother. The class becomes, I think, not only more enjoyable for the students, certainly for the instructor. Grading becomes a lot easier. I also have a rubric, so I don't have to go into nearly as much detail in my comments to them. I can just point to the rubric in terms of where they need to improve or the ways in which they're already doing really well. So.
Okay, excellent. So you've got a pretty robust discussion board system. You're very transparent in your instructions for students. What's next for your course design adventure, John?
Well, some of my Panopta recordings I like to re-record because I just like the first time I recorded them, it was the first time I did it, so I think I could improve on some of those recordings. I have also been kind of gauging the engagement of the students on certain of the different topics and readings that we're doing. And there are certain topics that they are naturally more engaged with, other ones that they're not. And I'm asking myself the question, what stuff do I really not need? And what can I change to bring more engagement for all of the discussion boards? And I've been kind of moving more towards more of a pragmatism of sorts, a type of thinking of, how can I give them philosophy that they can put in their pocket and take places with them and actually use in their life? They seem to be most interested in that kind of philosophy. So, for example, although I still am going to continue to do meta-ethics, it's a fairly technical area. It's difficult sometimes to transfer understanding of that online as compared to on ground. They get frustrated with that. I see lesser engagement with that. So, for example, I cut some of that out and put in some Stoicism. Now we're doing some, one of Epictetus's work, the handbook on Stoic philosophy. But they've really loved that. That was a fairly popular post or board. Same thing with, I added some Tolstoy in for Life and Meaning. They really have loved that one. Those are just some examples, but things of that nature. They seem to be more, again, kind of excited about.
Cool. Well, keep tinkering, John.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your strategies. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.